Aisha Thompson was not expecting her routine day to turn into a nightmare. A sharp pain in her lower back forced her to visit the hospital, thinking it was a minor injury, something temporary. But when she walked into the clinic, she could already feel that something was off. The staff seemed distracted, and the doctor assigned to her, Dr. Kevin Marshall, barely looked at her chart before dismissing her concerns. He told her that the pain was likely stress or just part of her weight, a comment that made Aisha's stomach turn. She knew her body. She knew something was seriously wrong, yet her words were brushed aside as if she were overreacting. Have you ever felt like no one was listening to you when you knew you were telling the truth? Think about that for a moment. Where are you watching from right now? Which city? Which town? While you're thinking about it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button if you want more stories like this. As she left the first appointment, Aisha felt the first pangs of fear that would soon turn into urgency. The pain intensified overnight, sharp and relentless, but the memory of the doctor's dismissive tone kept her from immediately returning. She questioned herself, wondering if she was imagining things, yet her instincts told her otherwise. The next morning, she returned, her pain now so severe that she could barely stand. Nurse Linda Reyes, who was responsible for assisting patients in the ward, noticed the discrepancy between Aisha's physical condition and what had been documented in the charts. Linda wanted to speak up, to ensure Aisha got the care she needed, but she hesitated, afraid of going against Dr. Marshall's authority. Meanwhile, Aisha, frustrated and scared, began recording her conversations and interactions with the medical staff on her phone, documenting every dismissive comment, every overlooked symptom. She felt a growing sense of urgency, a need to protect herself from negligence that could cost her mobility, or worse. By the third day, Aisha could no longer ignore that this was more than a simple medical oversight. Her legs were weak, her movement limited, and her voice when she tried to explain the severity of her condition was met with sighs and condescending smiles. She began to suspect that her treatment, or the lack of it, was influenced by something deeper than just carelessness. Could it be bias, she wondered, a systemic prejudice that made her complaints less valid because of the color of her skin? As she left the hospital that day, Aisha knew she could not wait for justice to come from inside those walls. She reached out to an attorney experienced in medical negligence and bias cases, someone who could look at her evidence with an objective eye. The attorney encouraged her to continue documenting everything, every interaction, every dismissive comment, every delay in treatment. Aisha also contacted a local journalist who had a reputation for covering injustices in healthcare. With the recordings from her phone and her detailed notes, they began piecing together a timeline that painted a troubling picture. Repeated negligence, a pattern of dismissing complaints from patients of color, and systemic failure to address these issues despite prior warnings. Every day, Aisha's condition worsened, but she became stronger in her resolve. She was no longer a passive patient. She was a survivor in the making, documenting proof of systemic failure while fighting to save herself from permanent injury. Each new interaction revealed more evidence. Dr. Marshall repeatedly ignoring abnormal test results, nurses reluctant to contradict his orders, and administrators prioritizing the hospital's reputation over patient safety. It became clear that this was not just an isolated incident, but a pattern that affected many patients like her. The journalist's investigation uncovered dozens of similar complaints from the past 5 years, all dismissed quietly. Aisha's recordings became crucial, showing clearly that warnings from patients were ignored and that responses from medical staff varied depending on the patient's background. Fear mixed with anger in Aisha's mind, yet she pressed on, knowing that exposing the truth could prevent others from suffering the same way. Every doctor visit became a battle, every report filed a small victory, and every ignored call a reminder of how much she had to fight to be heard. The growing media attention created pressure on the hospital, but Dr. Marshall and hospital administrators tried to minimize the situation, claiming there was no wrongdoing and that Aisha was exaggerating her symptoms. But her evidence told a different story, a story of neglect, bias, and a system that often protects the powerful while leaving the vulnerable to fend for themselves. Aisha's story was becoming public, and with each passing day, she felt the weight of responsibility, not just for herself, but for anyone who might be denied care because of systemic prejudice. The situation escalated as Aisha's health deteriorated, and the hospital was finally forced to act. Her persistence, combined with the journalist's reporting, exposed the extent of Dr. Marshall's repeated negligence. A formal investigation was launched, and Nurse Linda, seeing the evidence, decided to testify, finally speaking out about the patterns of neglect she had witnessed. It was a pivotal moment that shifted the balance in Aisha's favor. She watched as officials examined her recordings, notes, and detailed accounts, realizing that the dismissive attitudes she faced were not isolated, but part of a wider problem. Legal proceedings began, and the courtroom became the stage for a story of courage, endurance, and the fight for justice. Aisha recounted every moment, every overlooked symptom, every dismissive remark, painting a vivid picture of how systemic bias can endanger lives. The hospital, under pressure from public scrutiny and the weight of evidence, had to confront its failures. Dr. Marshall was suspended, pending further review, and policies regarding patient care, particularly for minority patients, were revised. Through months of hearings, testimony, and negotiations, Aisha saw the system respond, slowly but undeniably, to the truth she had fought so hard to reveal. The judge recognized both the medical negligence and the systemic bias that had contributed to her suffering. Compensation was awarded, but more importantly, the case set a precedent, showing that persistence and documentation can hold institutions accountable. Aisha became a voice for others, advocating for patients' rights and raising awareness about how prejudice and negligence can intertwine to create dangerous situations. The story of her struggle resonated widely, inspiring others to speak up when ignored or dismissed. Her life was forever changed by the ordeal, but so was the hospital system she challenged. She had transformed from a patient struggling for survival into a symbol of resistance against injustice. The lesson of her story was clear: systems can fail, and people in authority can neglect or dismiss those they should protect. But courage, evidence, and perseverance can restore balance, even in the face of systemic bias. The fight for justice is never easy, and the scars of negligence may remain. But Aisha's survival and activism became proof that one determined individual can make a difference. Her recordings, her documentation, and her refusal to accept dismissal became a tool for change, shining a light on practices that were previously hidden. While Dr. Marshall faced disciplinary measures, Aisha continued her advocacy, educating others about recognizing and documenting signs of medical neglect and bias. She worked with community groups, shared her story online, and mentored those who felt powerless in similar situations. Her struggle became a narrative of empowerment, reminding viewers that awareness and action are vital in confronting institutional failures. Aisha's journey underscored the intersection of healthcare, systemic bias, and personal courage. She showed that when society turns a blind eye to minority patients' voices, consequences can be severe. But speaking up, recording evidence, and demanding accountability can save lives and prevent future harm. This story is not just about medical errors. It is about resilience, justice, and the relentless pursuit of fairness. The courage of one woman illuminated flaws in an entire system, forcing reflection, reform, and accountability. It reminds every viewer that vigilance, determination, and a refusal to be silenced are powerful tools against injustice. We all have a role in noticing unfairness, standing up for those who are ignored, and demanding that institutions serve people, not protect reputations. Now, think about the people in your community, the friends, family, and neighbors who might face similar struggles. What would you do if it were you or someone you loved? Aisha's story is a call to action and a lesson that silence can be dangerous, but courage is transformative. If this story impacted you, Take a moment to support this channel, subscribe, and hit the like button. Share these stories because awareness is the first step toward change. Every view and every click amplifies the message that injustice, bias, and negligence cannot remain hidden. Aisha survived, but her fight continues in every conversation, every policy review, and every person inspired to speak out. Let her story remind us all that no one is powerless, that the voice of one can ignite the awareness of many, and that accountability begins with noticing, documenting, and acting. Subscribe now and hit that like button to stay connected to stories that reveal truth, courage, and the pursuit of justice for those who are too often unheard.